Thanks for staying up later. Alan Thicke is with us tonight. Welcome back to Late Night.
Thank you. Is the country ready for it?
Does it bring happy memories to think about your stint, actually earlier than this, just about anything's earlier than this, but in Late Night? Is it happy memories? Is it still a little painful?
There were parts of it were a nightmare. Not as painful for me, maybe, as for the audience. But I have happy memories of Thicke of the Night, if for no other reason the fact that it led me to growing pains and I ended up with a good life.
Yeah. And the show actually featured some names that are much respected. Richard Belzer, Gilbert Gottfried, Arsenio Hall was on the program. You've gone on to make your mark, as you said, on Growing Pains, and you already had done very well prior to that in Canada. Fred Silverman was the executive producer. Wasn't like these were a bunch of schmoes.
No, we had some nice ideas, and some of our ideas have been developed by other people since then, and they've made them work. We had some very talented people. If I had one skill back in those days, it may have been as a good discoverer of talent. I had a good eye for some people that I liked and respected, and they did go on. You mentioned many of them. Arsenio was my co-host during Thicke of the Night, and I had found some terrific people back in my days as a producer on Fernwood Tonight, found some more on Thicke of the Night, but we never quite got it together. And there are many reasons that Thicke of the Night maybe didn't fly. Consensus probably was that I was the chief reason among those. But we did some things that nobody's tried since. We did 90 minutes, and now I think everybody knows you can't really do more than an hour. And a guy with a real history in stand-up is probably best for that time period. With all due respect to you, I'm sure your stand-up background has stood you in good stead for this gig, Bob.
Yeah.
But those guys from...
And I am standing, Alan, actually, but you know...
The 11:30 to 1 o'clock guys, I think that it helps to have that real background in stand-up. And I was a schmoozier guy, and my success had been in daytime in Canada. So, and we tried a lot. We had sketches on the show and sketch players, and that turned out to be kind of an imposition, I think, on the relaxed, improvisational atmosphere of a late-night talk show. So it was all their fault, and not mine, of course.
The build-up was tremendous, though.
It was.
And the head-to-head with Carson, the way it was set up, set you up for a fall.
Yeah, and you're right. There was such a campaign.
Watch out, Carson, or move over Carson, or something.
And I wasn't part of it, I must say. I was not part of that campaign. And in fact, the first words out of my mouth on the show were, if you're watching Mr. Carson, I haven't been the one saying that stuff. I think you're the greatest, and let's hope I can just find room for myself. I did. It was a rubber room they would have put me in. There was no room for me in late night at that time, in that climate. But as I said, many things conspired to doom the show, I think. Maybe the ad campaign was chief among them. Also, one thing that killed the show, I think, is that I sang on the show. There was a tendency part of the hype fed into me in that they were telling me how terrific I was. And then you start to believe your own press clippings. And I had had some success in Canada, and part of it was we did a nighttime show, and there was music and singing, and I haven't looked at those tapes since then, but I know that in a few of those tapes, I actually, I wore tight leather pants, and I took myself somewat serious. I went out and sang a song like a part of Elvis really was living in me, which he was, but it was the part that liked donuts. It wasn't the part that sang rock and roll. But
big tactical error.
Yeah. So I was singing and loudly and rather brazenly, and I did that regularly on the show. I think that was one of the things that because it wasn't right. It was like, is this guy serious, or you know, is this a put on? It turned out that it was just a wrong element for the show. We had many of them, but there is that seduction of listening to your own hype sometimes as this bandwagon rolled into our debut night, and everybody said, you know, you should do these things, and I listened, and we were wrong.
Now, the reason why I brought that up first is that it's interesting to me, both because of what I know about you and then the additional things I found out when I got some of the research, that there's a side to you that's a lot edgier than the image that came out of that. And it's one thing to have a project fail. Almost everybody has had a show that didn't work out well, a show that eventually gets canceled. But what happened to you out of that show was that an image was attached to you of being bland, vanilla, or whatever. And so you had to fight not just the failure of the show, but what was stuck on you that wasn't really true based on what you had done up to that point, let alone since.
There were two sides to my career around that point. I had spent 10 years, the 70s rather, as a writer, and that was really my craft, and before I ever went on camera. And as a writer, as you know, you can put words suitable for anybody else's mouth that you wouldn't necessarily say yourself. So there was a side of me, a part that appreciated the dark comedy of some of the people that I got to work with in those days, Richard Pryor, and during the Fernwood days, Robin Williams, and some brilliant, wonderful people. But there were things that my mama wouldn't let me say. They just, you are comfortable saying some things on stage and free to write other things for other people to mouth. But that was not an image that I would have been comfortable. I can't say bad words on stage. I say them at home to my children, but I can't, it didn't feel right for me. And yet writing it and having somebody else say it was fine.
What are some of the packages you offer with this escort service? It sounds fascinating.
Well, we've got some wonderful ones. We've got the Surf and Sup, or Surf's Up, whichever one that is. It goes from the economy to the deluxe, which is Chateaubriand champagne on a yacht, to the economy, which is basically cream cheese, Calistoga, and a rowboat. Not now. She's a little anxious here.
Sure she is.
We also have another package.
So yes, I did have an edge to me. There is an edge that appreciates the comedy of other people, but I was never comfortable about that.
See, it's interesting through your whole career that way, because you're Dr. Seaver, and that's one sort of wholesome image. You did game shows in Canada, did them with good humor, but after all, there's a certain image attached to game shows. And then I'm watching a documentary called Mo Funny on the history of black comedy in America, and among those, sort of giving eyewitness testimony to the evolution of that form, is you, because you wrote for Richard Pryor, you wrote for Flip Wilson.
I had, I had a great life. The variety of my life has been very rewarding for me, as opposed to getting pigeonholed in anything in particular. And during those years that I wrote for those shows, I was having a great time, and I wrote for a lot of black artists during the 70s and early 80s. It became a networking kind of thing. First of all for Flip, and then they would refer me one to another, the guys who had television shows back then Sammy Davis, and then Lola Falana, and then Richard Pryor, and then Bill Cosby, and even musically, songs I was writing would get covered by Al Jarreau or the Spinners or Lou Rawls, and I write 6 chords. I move them around and they all sound country when I sing them, but somebody else would take them and turn them into R&B. So I had an interesting networking of friends and relationships and working relationships back in those days that my body of work would have certainly looked like it had more of an edge to it than Dr. Seaver parade host. But I have enjoyed the variety of those images, and I do think that as television performers, we have a certain responsibility to audience also, more than maybe the movie stars do. We are, after all, in their homes, and I think that we have a bit of a responsibility that I feel, for instance, when I'm out in public, because especially as part of a family image, I know that parents are bringing their children over to the table at the restaurant or wherever you are, expecting those kids to meet Jason Seaver, and I think that we owe our audience a little bit of respect and adherence to that image. I used to smoke. I didn't inhale, but I used to. I became conscious of smoking in public. I wouldn't smoke in a restaurant when I was doing Growing Pains.
Without making this a hand-wringing session, how tough was it personally after Thick of the Night, In the Thick of the Night, failed?
I was canceled and divorced on the same day, before noon. So I had a horrible lunch that day. The whole year after that went pretty much like that. And you know, as you start to lose, when things are going badly, there's no stopping that momentum. I got to where I would be reluctant to pick up a newspaper. I would hate to see my picture there because I didn't want to read the caption. You know, they say you're your own worst critic, but that wasn't true in my case. It was People magazine, and every week, boom, somebody would take a shot. And but when your luck is bad, there's no turning it around. We had a commercial on the show that people thought was a joke. I swear this was absolutely legitimate, but it would come on in the middle of every program, and it was kind of embarrassing because it was for new lightweight feminine napkins. And the announcer's voiceover would say, "Once you've tried new lightweight, you'll never go back to thick again." And that was the kind of year I had. There was one critic in the country who actually liked the show, and he tried to say something nice about it. Even that didn't come out right. He said, "Alan Thicke has a nice self-defecating sense of humor." I had that permaplanked.
We're back with Alan Thicke. A lot of this stuff on Fernwood, people may or may not recall, was really out there, especially for the time. You know, the mock scientist coming on claiming that they'd done research with laboratory rats and leisure suits can cause cancer.
I think that was proved to be true. Leisure suits did cause cancer. Yes, we were kind of out there. It was our theory, though, that the practice and my rule was always to really try to make it be credible. We never wanted anything to look like a sketch. If it looked like it was written, if the actors looked like they were acting, if there were jokes in the piece, then it wouldn't work. What really worked was absolutely buying into the credibility, the reality that this little town of Fernwood, Ohio, had a late-night talk show, and these were your local folks.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you were talking about?
Yes, well, we've been doing about 2 years of research involving the carcinogenic properties of various synthetic fabrics, double knits, and polyesters.
Well, we have a lot of laymen here tonight, and for sure. And what is that exactly in layman's terms?
Well, very simply stated, it means that leisure suits cause cancer.
Exactly how does that happen?
Well, you see, normal body heat causes these fibers to separate, and they're all synthetic oil-based materials, and they begin to emit certain gases, which can be very dangerous to humans if they breathe around the collar and lapel area.
Mm-hmm. In other words, the pants would be fine.
No, there's no danger involving the pants, as long as you don't inhale near someone's pants.
Some things that we did that we thought were pretty crazy later on became real life. We did a thing called hearing ear dogs for the deaf, which now is an industry. We did a piece called Talk to a Jew, which was based on the premise that there were no Jewish people in Fernwood, and maybe many Fernwoodians had never seen anyone of the Hebrew persuasion, and a guy was, a traveling salesman was going through town, was caught speeding one day, and as a public service, the sheriff thought it would be a good idea if he came on the show.
In lieu of fine or jail sentence.
Exactly, and talked to the people that had a phone in just to see that Jews were like anybody else. And sure enough, we had, hello, talk to a Jew, you're on the air. And the phone would pick him, we'd talk, and somebody would say, is this the Jew? Yes. Do you know when Barbara Streisand's next movie's coming out? And they would answer the question. Now, that seemed, to some people, that was apparently quite offensive. We got letters of condemnation from Baptists and Presbyterians who thought that we were doing a disservice to our Jewish brethren. And Norman Lear and the company got a commendation from B'nai B'rith, saying what a wonderful satire you have done in, and what a great service you have done to our people in showing the kind of bias or hypocrisy or prejudicial response that some people have towards anyone of an ethnic persuasion other than their own. So the satire worked for those who got it.
There was one, now what this says about me that I remember this, I don't know, but the principal of Fernwood High School came on, and it was his position that as long as it was applied judiciously, nothing wrong with a little corporal punishment in the schools, even in this modern era. And the demonstration was in order.
Corporal punishment in the schools was something not to be feared, and he showed that it could be done lovingly, and he brought out a young cheerleader from the squad who came out and in her pom-pom finery spread herself over his lap, and he simply said, brush up, brush down, and slap. And he would leave his hand there for a long time. You see, parents, there's nothing to be afraid of. Your children are well taken care of in the school. Brush up, brush down, and slap. And he would leave his hand there for another minute or so. So yes, I'm not sure what it says about you, Bob, that you,
well,
other than you should be on even later at night.
It's interesting that about the same time, in the mid or late 70s, you were writing specials for Richard Pryor and Barry Manilow, right around the same time.
Few people ever saw them perform together, but but yes, I did that right around the same time. Again, that was the fun of the variety of my life. I also wrote for Bobby Vinton, and that's a long way away from the Richard Pryor audience, but that provided me with a great arena for experimentation, and interestingly, as a writer, you would even bring some things you learned from your Richard Pryor experience to Barry Manilow and vice versa. You know, it is all still a question of finding what that artist's audience really likes in that human being and what they really relate to, and therefore what they want to see, and drawing that out and making sure the artist is represented that way on television and letting them grow by 15 or 20% at the same time. A lot of artists want to do only new things when they come on television, but that's not what got them there. And by the same token, a lot of people in those days, in the 70s, variety artists, wanted only to do what they were comfortable and familiar with, and then you've got to say, wait a minute, we want to push the envelope here by a little bit to give them something a little different. So there was always a challenge, no matter what the image or background of that performer might have been, to bring them properly to television. And this was prior to MTV, of course, so variety television was still a viable entity then.
Easy to see, though, with that kind of background, plus your own performing background, even if most of it had been in Canada, where somebody would say, this isn't like an idea from Mars, somebody would say, this guy could be the host of a talk show, because talk shows, by definition, are eclectic.
We had a very successful talk show in Canada. It was the highest-rated daytime show in the history of Canadian television, but daytime was right for me. That was a good place for me to be. It was wrong for me to do late night in that Carson competition kind of genre, and I was quite successful in that daytime show. And of course, you know, if something's not broken, you fix it immediately. Right. We might have had a different outcome had we brought that show to the United States.
Now, before we go, I happened to see a clip of the game show that you hosted in Canada. What was the name of that show?
Hello. Face the Music?
Face the
Is that
Music.
the one you've got?
That's the one.
Uh-huh.
Now, I know we have to run this clip.
It's sort of
So you set it up.
It's sort of a low-rent name that tune, unless that's redundant. This was, I haven't seen this clip, but it is a show that I hosted back in the mid-'70s. I was living in the States, and I would commute up there, and I think that, as I recall, the format was they would play a bit of a song, and if you recognize it, then you win a big prize. Now, in Canada, you don't get a car, you get a picture of a car, or you get a keychain. Back in those days, we weren't giving away, you know, but the wheels and everything. But yeah, so that's Face the Music.
And now here's the star of our show, Alan Thicke.
Thank you. Hello. Yes. Welcome to Face the Music. This is the show that John Lennon once saw and said, "My set's broken. I don't understand it." No, just kidding. Face the Music is the show. A lot of prizes, a lot of songs, and 4 very happy contestants. They'll be even happier if they can take home that new car.
Before we run here, now that Growing Pains is not on the air anymore, what are you up to?
Writing a lot this year, including a movie that my brother and I are doing about my grandfather's life story. He died last year of Alzheimer's, and it's about the impact of aging on a family. And we'll do another sitcom pilot, and a lot of personal appearances and speaking engagements, and getting out and seeing the people and enjoying that this year.
We enjoyed this. Thanks a lot for coming by.
Thanks, Bob. My pleasure.
Alan Thicke, folks. We're out of here. See you later.